We found a lost city in the Amazon. We found a lost city in Mayan city in Guatemala. The young Earth timescale is actually the key parameter or assumption, I guess you could say, to start putting the pieces together. It's genetic discoveries that have illuminated the veracity of the indigenous accounts themselves. So this book is not a lost city in North America, but it is, in a sense, a lost history that we're rediscovering, that the evolutionists are not able to do for a number of reasons.
Welcome to the Creation Today Show, where we bring together interviews with experts and solid Bible teaching. Your host, Eric Hovind, affirms the ultimate authority of God's Word, the truth of creation, and why it matters to you.
What if the true history of Native American tribes is not lost to time, but is actually hidden in plain sight? Guys, in this episode of the Creation Today Show, we're going to dive into genetics, archaeology, scripture, and we're going to trace the lineages of today's Native people back to the Table of Nations found in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. Now, after you hear this, I promise you can forget about the evolutionary tale of some land bridge 15,000 years ago, because this is real scientific and biblical truth. The truth of how the Sioux, the Navajo, and the Apache and others came to North America. It's a journey through science and scripture and history that uncovers what the textbooks won't tell you. So buckle up, guys. This changes everything you thought you knew about American history. Welcome to the Bloodlines of the Americas. Hey guys, if you're new to the Creation Today Show, welcome. We are on a mission to disciple the world. We want to turn your stumbling blocks into powerful stepping stones on your journey to know the truth. So my social media viewers out there, thank you guys. We're so glad you guys are joining us. Please hit those like, subscribe, and follow buttons. That helps spread this truth more than you can imagine. And if you're watching on our television stations, please send your station manager a note or an email or $100 check. Tell them you're so thankful that they are airing the Creation Today Show. Now, you guys are in for a real treat today, because my guest for this fascinating conversation is going to talk about his new book, They Had Names. And he is a Harvard-trained biologist who's using his mind and his mouth to declare God's glory in a really powerful way. He holds a PhD in cell biology and developmental biology, and he now serves as a research biologist, author, and speaker with Answers in Genesis. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson. Dr. Jeanson, welcome to the Creation Today Show, sir.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's a pleasure to be on.
I am excited about this because as I read and as I look, I go, what you cover in here has massive implications for Christianity, for the scientific community, and for the creation science research community. What inspired you to do a work like this? They Had Names.
In one sense, to use a trite phrase that we're accused of not doing, I would say it's simply a matter of following the evidence where it leads and the tools that are available. So I began 15 years ago, just to sketch the history briefly, with the question of the origin of species at the Institute for Creation Research, and spent about 5, 6, 7, 8 years on that. About 2015, began to shift my focus more towards the human question, mainly because the annual research budget for the National Institutes of Health is $45 billion annually. So aside from some bacteria, humans are the best studied species at the genetic level on this planet. Lots of boomers, others, want answers to health. And so there's tons of publicly taxpayer-funded data out there that's made available to taxpayers like you and me. And so this data now is available for any creationist who wants to analyze it. I dove into that, wrote the book Trace in 2022, which is a global analysis of the history of humanity, and spent about a year kind of chasing all the regional paths, developing contacts around the world, and at some point realized, Ken Ham probably wants me to write a book, so I should focus on one of these regions more heavily. It also happened that the social media team came to me saying, hey, by the way, these videos that you do, it's the Americas that really gets the most attention. Can you keep going that way? Talked to the publisher 2 years ago saying, hey, we're thinking about doing a book this direction. What do you think? Yeah, that'll work. It also helps to be closer to home, where you can read where the literature is in English, not in French or German or Spanish or something else. And you don't have to travel across the Atlantic to meet people. So I've been able to develop a lot of contacts nationally here through this project. And it also helps, of course, if you can connect some of the dots and make discoveries. So that was a key plank along the way. And all that came together then again, this is the summary version to produce this book.
Did you, as I look through it, I go, it seems like this is both a layman level and almost a scientific level challenge to the traditional evolutionary timeline regarding the origin of the tribes here in America. And I know we're going to get into that, but is this designed as layman level? Because it seems like Master Books did this with you. I mean, they're very much presenting stuff to the average person out there to read and understand. And your book is certainly understandable, but it also really just, I don't even know how to describe, it really challenges the scientific community.
Yes, so I would say it's both. It's very accessible, but I'm somewhat envious of my evolutionary colleagues because I can sit down and just write a low-level book and not have to justify anything they say because they're 99% and everyone's going to believe me anyways, who cares type thing. Whereas you can never do that as a creationist, at least not in today's day and age, being in the 1% minority. So there's the main storyline of the book that is very accessible, and I feel like part of the storyline, which we'll probably get into, is me visiting some of the sites, which provide some fun and terrifying anecdotes, but that lightens, I think, the text to some degree. But there's appendices. So basically what I've done in the last couple of years, this book and Traced, is try to tell a lay-level story or an accessible story in the main text, and then for the nerdy peers who want to criticize, dump some of the technical detail in the appendices so that it doesn't interrupt the flow of the text. And, if you're one of those minority categories, you can go knock yourself out looking at it, plus supplemental data online, that sort of thing. So it's kind of splitting the difference of main audience is going to be lay level. I know there are people, and even lay level though, is going to say, well, how do I know I can believe you? That's always the question in this debate, is a question of trust. And so I think even for lay people saying, oh, he's got a big body of work back here that says this is why, and they may not read it, but it's still okay. It's nice to know. I want to know. I mean, I'm a layperson outside my field, and so I'm going to read a geology book. Or I remember reading, I think it was Russ Humphrey's book, Starlight and Time, and I appreciated the lay level part, and I appreciated being able to look in the back and see that there was some stuff that was detailed that I would never follow, but I knew it was there, and so I knew there was a lot of work that had gone into, and it wasn't just some crackpot trying to tell me what he dreamt last night and came up and was the solution to world peace. So.
I love it. Walk us through then. Let's jump into, I don't know how much you have to go into the background of Traced. We did a show with you on Traced when that book came out to talk about the Y chromosome in men, the Y mitochondrial Eve in women, and kind of what it is. Do you have to go back to that to kind of give the groundwork for what you've done here? It kind of builds on that?
I can do that, and I can give you a preview of what's not in the book, because there's a paper that's coming out probably next month that adds to this, where I finally cracked the female side of the equation, but that's getting ahead of myself. So well, you take us. Maybe I should let you lead, because you've done this so much. Maybe you should just kind of lead us along the way of how should we understand this. And by the way, people, to my viewers out there, this is available at Answers in Genesis. This is available at Creation Today, Master Books. You can get this wherever you shop. And let me tell you, it's worth the read. I really highly recommend it. Walk us through this then. Tell us where we should get started. Let me maybe approach it through a couple different angles, storyline angles. So there's the basic narrative of the text that I'll walk through, but there's also an apologetics background that I think is very significant. So the main storyline, in a sense, is personal for me, and perhaps personal for a lot of people growing up here. So I was homeschooled through 8th grade, went to small Christian high school, and then off to undergraduate, where my focus was biology. So my last history class was probably Baptist High School in Union Grove, Wisconsin. And it was a great education, and I think it probably standard for what most people grew up hearing, except that it had a obviously Christian angle. And for us then, world history, so I should say my history classes were, I think in freshman was geography, then we had a world history, I think 10th grade, U.S. history 11th, and then something like civics and government in 12th. So there are basically two opportunities to hear about, in theory, the pre-European history of the Americas. U.S. history, but that's, I mean, almost by definition, that's starting with Pilgrims and Jamestown and all that, and quickly over to the American Revolution. The other would be world history, and many world history courses, and I've watched kind of the Bob Jones curriculum, for example, I think changed somewhat with time. They've expanded somewhat to incorporate more of the global history instead of just Western civilization. But that still is the focus, and there's good reason to focus on Western civilization. It's the basis for our country. It's the basis for what's so much is going on right now. You always have to make a choice. You can't cover everything in 2 semesters. But there was a big void in all my curriculum growing up, and this is, again, just how we grew up. It's because no one has had answers to the question of what people were here, what were they doing, what events happened, what are the names for Europe. By contrast, again, that's I think where it came out more. There was an implicit void growing up as maybe elementary, junior high, where we spent a lot of time. I mean, what boy growing up doesn't want to talk about cowboys and Indians and have a lot of fun? It's always attractive. Weapons especially, that was a favorite part. What do they use to fight, and their dress and so on. So I enjoyed it, but we never got to before Europeans. That was just missing.
Right.
So at some point you notice that and you start to ask questions. And then of course you notice it even more so when you take a course that says, here's Europe and here's a whole sequence of maps of who did what and where they were and how the map changed. And these are the names of the leaders and the heroes and the kings and dates. We get bored with all the dates and facts, but then you come to the Americas and you say there's nothing. There's no names and facts to get bored with. There's just a big blank. And for me then personally too, because I grew up in two cultures, my mother was German, all her relatives are over there still, and we visit every year and also do touristy things. And you can hardly turn around in Germany and not run into some sort of medieval castle or cathedral that immediately tells there's a long history here. I've been to Italy too on a work trip, and Roman ruins are everywhere, thousands of years old. So in Europe, you're constantly reminded if you travel there, there's a long sequence. And then again, this is what sets up a puzzle. You come back to the States and you say, okay, well, where are we going to go? Well, I guess we could go to Plymouth Plantation. We could go to Gettysburg. We can go to these other places. Those ruins and sites, I mean, I spent 23 years of my life in Wisconsin, and I don't know that I could have told you any place to go to that spoke to the pre-European history of North America. It turns out there's a very interesting site, which I'll get to eventually. But that's the void I grew up with. And this book, in a sense, that was a long-winded introduction to this book, seeks to fill that void with answers. Of course, you can't just make it up. And the reason I haven't written this book prior is because I haven't had answers. And just another personal anecdote. I remember when I joined the Institute for Creation Research in 2009, early on, I was working with the female inherited mitochondrial DNA, looking at a global scale, because the main focus, again, is very creation science, Noah, Genesis questions. But there's Native Americans in the mitochondrial DNA databases, and so I was kind of scratching my head and thinking, well, when's the first evidence for settling? Went to one of my colleagues, Jim Johnson, who had done, he was a tour guide, I think, on cruises, like, let's say, in the Caribbean and such, and had to learn some of the Mayan history. And so I went to him because I didn't know any answers about what happened and what's the earliest evidence for civilization here, and just very ignorant of all this. So that's where I was starting as a professional creation scientist in 2009. And so we've come a long way since then. I've come a long way since then in terms of what I've had to assimilate in terms of knowledge, but also what's been exciting is to be able to make discoveries. So here's the angle, I think, that kind of brings in the how we got to these answers is really where we can bang the creation science drum and put the significance apologetically in a profound context, because this really is, and this is not to toot my own horn, let's say, but I think this is objectively so. And there've been growing pains in learning this, even just me realizing, okay, where are we at? What does this mean in the larger creation evolution war? And I think it's a really exciting step. So just to sketch, I think what's transpired and then put my own story in that context. I was born 1980, missed the excitement of the 70s. I think we got some of ICR's old library here to AIG. I don't remember when, but we have the old book versions of Acts and Facts from the 70s.
Nice.
So they put them together. And there was one article, I don't know whether it had an author, from 76, celebrating how exciting it was to be on all these college campuses and 30,000 students, many unbelievers. And there's just a laundry list of places they've gone to that we'd never get into today. UNC and UW-Madison and Berkeley and UCSD. I mean, just boom, boom, this long paragraph list of colleges that are well known, that Gish or Morris or others had spoken at or debated. And that's really the heyday of creation science. And I wouldn't, that also spawned putting creation science back in the public schools. Morris talks about how the success of the debates and people like Douglas Fatuma, a well-known, very vitriolic anti-creationist, would be like, well, and Gish had considerable success. I mean, there's backhanded, we weren't doing well, the evolutionists say. And all that changes basically right after I'm born. 1981 is the National Center for Science Education founded, Eugenie Scott, infamous president for many years. And the court cases, 82 court decision about the Arkansas law, 87 Supreme Court decision about the Louisiana law, all lay down in the 80s. That sets the current legal and public school educational environment. That's the world I grew up in, and I don't know any different. I hear about it in print, but that's what's put us where we are today. And the standard then for 40 years that evolutionists have given us, if we want to have a place at the scientific table, it's not enough, they will say, whether you're creationist or intelligent design, you can't just criticize evolution. The Dover case in 2005 basically said the same thing. You're just old-timey creationists, just criticizing evolution, can't do that. Whether that's true or not, that's what they're saying. And my task then, so I joined ICR 2009, AIG in 2015. My main focus, knowing this whole time, is this little voice in the shoulder. You got to make testable predictions if you want to get back in the wider cultural war about creation evolution, if you want to at least have a chance to relitigate this, if that's eventually the goal, or at least answer the atheist objections, because that's, of course, you're going to find that on the atheist sites too. They love to tout it. And so the first book I published, so there's a whole bunch of papers, of course, which are dry and boring, we won't get into, but they laid the basis for the books. And Replacing Darwin is the first book that I wrote, titled, deliberately chosen, the research deliberately angled to say not just here's problems with evolution, but here's also the replacement. I put predictions in print in the Lord's kind providence. Steve Austin tells a story that I think either right when he finished his master's or PhD, he said, and somehow in God's providence, Mount St. Helens erupted, and now I had my laboratory. So right after Replacing Darwin comes out, that was October 2017. In January 2018, Peter and Rosemary Grant, the long-standing Princeton couple who've been studying Darwin's finches on Galapagos Islands for decades, announced the finding of a new species. I hadn't paid attention to it until I think February 12th, or one of those, Darwin's birthday. There's a favorite holiday, of course, with the evolutionists like to poke fingers in our eyes to celebrate their cultural successes. And they cited this paper saying, look, we can throw this in the face of the creationist. A new species has been formed. Take that, you Bible thumpers. I was like, oh, well, what is this paper? Turns out that this new species that formed of Darwin's finches, you can run some numbers to say, okay, what's the rate of speciation? And they also had a paper talking about the genetics, what's the mechanisms of speciation? On both counts, exactly in line with what I just predicted 4 months prior. Praise the Lord. This is not just we're making predictions, but they're working. This is wild. Then another prediction I made in Replacing Darwin had to do with human history. So that's part of the shift again towards this human history side. We should be able to see history stamped all over our DNA. In fact, I've got a diagram here. Hold on. I've got the wrong PowerPoint. Well, I might come to it. But anyway, The point being, maybe I'll just diagram it this way. It's a relative argument is what I want to show. Evolution says if this is human history and this is 200,000 years ago, where the first anatomically modern humans evolved in Africa, and then this is the present. Just the last tiny little tidbit of evolutionary history is the history of civilization. So if you have a family tree that you stretch across this timeline, it's just a tiny little bit of the human family tree that should tell us about the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians and so forth. Whereas for young Earth creationists, again, it's a relative comparison. So I'm going to use the same frame to say 4,500 years, not 200,000. Everything before flood was destroyed in terms of civilizations. And so the history of civilization is the entirety of post-flood history. So if you stretch a human DNA family tree across this, boom, 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 you should be able to count off, mark off, and that's a technical explanation that I won't get into, but you should be able to see all the echoes of the history of civilization there. And that's essentially what the book Trace in 2022 does, is say, here we see it. This is what we predict. Now we've found the echo. The history of civilization is stamped all over our DNA. We also happen to find the DNA echo of Genesis 10, the mirror image of the genealogy. I was looking at male DNA, and of course Genesis 10 is males. So that's an exciting advance. And then what this book is, apologetically, is making predictions, fulfilling them. But what gets me excited is all that work prior. I'm speaking to my own because that's just what I know, and that's the field that I know, biology. This biological work prior is evolutionists have already staked ground. I'm pushing back against that and saying I'm reclaiming ground with these new predictions. We've all grown up saying, I grew up learning nothing about the pre-Columbian Americas because no one's had answers. It's not that the evolutionists have staked ground. They've staked some. But again, I feel like the proof is in the pudding. Ask anyone, what did you learn about the pre-Columbian Americas? Maybe they'll say, you had mentioned, the 15,000 years ago, But that's it. That's about it. All anyone can ever say. I mean, and then I guess the Potawatomi has just sat around here for 10,000 years. I mean, that's kind of the crux of the evolutionary explanation. There isn't much to it.
That's what I find interesting is you're actually going back, doing that research and going on the offense, so to speak. Creation science is now going from a defensive stance to an offensive stance, and that's what this book seems to be as well.
Yes, and the new framework I guess I've had to wrap my mind around and talk about a lot internally here because it's new for all of us is, and if I've said this already, forgive me, but I feel like it bears repeating. We're so used to as creationists, myself included, of the evolutionists get their millions, billions of dollars of funding. They do the research. They now, we found a lost city in the Amazon. We found a lost city in Mayan city in Guatemala, which is exciting. The Associated Press writes a story about off the press release, off the paper, and then we react to it. We do a news article, we do something like that. Or maybe I'll take the raw data and reanalyze it, something like that. In this case, so this book is not a lost city in North America, but it is, in a sense, a lost history that we're rediscovering that the evolutionists are not able to do for a number of reasons. One is, and this is also what's exciting to me, it is explicitly grounded in the young Earth timeline. This isn't just generically evolution versus creation, which is how biology has been for a while, for decades, where in kind of the afterthought in the origins, in the age of the Earth debate, it's been the geologists and the astronomers who kind of dealt with that. And maybe we find some common ground with the old Earth guys because, well, evolution is the big bad boogeyman, so can't we just unite on that? And in this case, no. If you actually want to replace it with something better, it is impossible to divorce from the timescale if you want to go anywhere with the science. And in this case, it is explicitly grounded in the timescale. You can't escape it, and the young Earth timescale is actually the key parameter or assumption, I guess you could say, to start putting the pieces together. It's and the pieces in particular here that are so valuable both scientifically and socially are not just, okay, this happened at this point, this is the date, these are the people, and so on, but it's genetic discoveries that have illuminated the veracity of the indigenous accounts themselves, where in many cases evolution has essentially taken those accounts away, or, and this kind of blows my mind, but this is postmodernism for you. The evolutionists will say, here's the scientific account, and we also affirm these indigenous histories, even though they completely contradict what we just said. We're just going to hold them both at the same time. I think, how can you live rationally that way? It just doesn't work. But that's the modern world for you, sadly. We can say spiritual. That's the depraved mind.
So literally, the young Earth creation model, the biblical model as a hypothesis, the Noah's flood as a hypothesis, actually makes predictions, and the data that we're finding is matching the predictions when you have the young Earth position as your hypothesis.
Yes, and if you were to have a sort of a hypothetical courtroom discussion and the judge says to me, let's say, because if this is on trial, can't you just leave the Bible stuff out? Why, Your Honor, that's actually been the key scientific plank to make these discoveries. That would be completely irrational. It's not just we want to sneak it in. It forms the basis for making these discoveries, for writing headlines and breaking the news.
You write in chapter number 1, you said, the tribes of North America have names. These are not lost people. These are known peoples with known ancestries and known roots. Is this, because we don't, like you said, we don't have these history books. Is this some history, but a lot of genetics? Is that how you're getting to this?
It's a combination of both. It's multidisciplinary. It's and this reminded me, come back to this point about, it reminded me of another shortcoming in the evolutionary model and why we never hear about it in school. But it's a combination of genetics that, in terms of chronology, it was the genetic discoveries first that I was able to make with, for example, male inherited Y chromosome DNA. Coming up is still this female inherited mitochondrial DNA. That illuminated, oh, okay, there are some accounts that line up exactly with genetics that have previously been dismissed. Well, now we can bring those in. Those are what supply some of the names of the heroes where we didn't hear about them because, hey, well, that's a fraud, that's a forgery, or it's not true. Well, no, now we know it is true. It has been true because no fraudulent account from 200 years ago could predict genetic discoveries. Only real histories do that. And so there's a history element to it. There's linguistics, there's archaeology. There's going to be reinterpretations of archaeology. A lot of what I'm dealing with is in the AD era, where there isn't really that much contradiction between radiocarbon dates for young Earth creation and radiocarbon dates for evolution. You go back way deep in time, of course there is. And here's really another side point to make about evolution. I think one of the reasons we don't hear about it in school and we don't have names in school is because the evolutionists are very hesitant to assign modern tribal causation or names to archaeological sites. So you'll read a textbook, and this is the Hopewell culture, the Adena culture, the Poverty Point culture, the Mississippian culture. And I use some of those names too in the book because there's limits even to what I can do. This is still research that's ongoing. But even stuff that's very close to contact, well, I don't know if we can. So then your school child is going to hear about Sitting Bull and the Lakota and the Sioux and get excited, and then Hopewell Mounds, and your eyes glaze over and you start yawning, and it's just not exciting or interesting anymore because it doesn't mean anything. Because who are the Hopewell people? We don't learn about the Custer fighting the Hopewell at the Battle of Little Bighorn. We hear about the Sioux and others. We hear about Great Plains and the Cheyenne, and those have meaning. And that's one benefit then of this research and of the book is I can now through the rigorous research say it was actually the Cheyenne, or it was the Kiowa, or it was the Navajo that built this, or these were the invaders, and this was the battle, and it wasn't just Tribe A and Tribe B, because we don't know who it was. This is the Delaware or the Algic peoples, and their main enemies were the Natchez, and these guys massacred them, and they fought back in combination with the Sioux, and you can tell a story like we grew up learning for European history. And as a humorous side note, I've been saying part of my task here is to make history boring again. So it's kind of exciting when it's a mystery because there's a chase. And of course, once you find it, it's like, oh, well, now it's facts and dates to learn again.
Right. Right.
But there's a respect then. That's to me the benefit for the indigenous community. Not only are we giving them back their histories, but if others learn this, even if we're bored to tears in history class, when you learn something like this, there's an inherent respect that you gain for it. And so even when you go as a tourist to some of these places, like, oh, I didn't stand that history, but the Colosseum was pretty cool. I mean, you stand in front of it, and this is a big structure, and there's an inherent respect and dignity that, even if it's subconscious, becomes a part of someone. And I feel like that's valuable, and I think the Native Americans would find that valuable if the Caucasian community or others who read it say, okay, now I know some of your backstory, and I respect it. And I feel like that's I feel like it's a biblical goal and a worthy one.
I've got just a couple minutes left, about 4 minutes left with social media. In chapter 4, if you can get into a little bit of this, the DNA, and maybe you got some slides for this, you said DNA is the language of ancestry. And when we read through the lens of Scripture, it reveals a story far more coherent and more ancient than secular history admits. And I just go, okay, can you get a little bit into this research and what this is actually showing? Can you give the social media people in less than 5 minutes a little, like, here's how I know I'm right on this?
Yeah. So
am I giving you an impossible task there?
No, we can answer two things quickly. The how do I know I'm right is we basically worked backwards in time. I feel like that's the process for any scientific research is start with what you know, beat it to death until it yields all its secrets, and then you can be confident going to what you don't know. So what did I know ahead of time before the genetics? And this is the mainstream view as well, that there were lots of people in the Americas before Europeans arrived. 80 to 90% died out. In the last century or two, there's been a recovery. I'm like, there has to be a smoking gun of this post-Columbian event. It's technical, the explanation, but there should be something there. And finding it was actually the key to uncovering the global family tree. Because once I knew I found this, I'm like, okay, I'm on the right track. And there's a marker of time. And the shocks that it revealed from the Y chromosome were, and let me actually tell you, I can bring in the mitochondrial DNA, the female inherited DNA. There have been at least 5 settlings of the Americas. The book only talks about 3 because it was, again, this is research that's ongoing, and so the book goes to press, and then you make a discovery, and it's too late to add that in. But there's a paper that's coming out, and I'll have probably another book come 2027 on Central America that discusses this. But there was if you work backwards in time, or we can go forwards in time, there was the Olmec culture, which built those giant sculpted heads in Central America. There was a migration I can see with mitochondrial DNA in 1000 BC, probably gave rise to the Mayans. There was one in 100 BC that probably gave rise to the biggest city in pre-Columbian North America, Teotihuacan, 200,000 people that fell in about 600 AD. There was a migration that I can see Y chromosome and mitochondrial about the 300 to 400s AD, then one with Y chromosome in the 900s AD, and then of course there's contact. So it was a very dynamic, changing place, which really, it's like the rest of the globe. It's not some isolated pocket. Somehow the Native Americans are different from the rest of humanity. History plays itself out the same way here as it has played elsewhere in the globe. They're fully human like the rest of us.
That's amazing. So Gary's talking about this in the chat, one of our partners. It's like, you really can trace all this all the way back to Babel.
Yes. Yes. With the Y chromosome, you can trace back to specific sons or grandsons or men in Genesis chapter 10. With the mitochondrial DNA, it's ladies. So we don't have a list of ladies in Genesis chapter 10, but there's a surprising amount. I'm surprised by the amount of overlap that I'm finding so far between mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome. So by association, I might be able to say, hey, this female lineage probably goes with Ham, or Ham's son Canaan or Cush or something, because you look at the Y chromosome distribution, it matches the mitochondrial, and well, with the Y chromosome, it's this guy. So we might even have some indirect arguments we can make with mitochondrial DNA that take us right back to the immediate post-flood time frame.
Wow. Okay, I want to get into this. We'll have to do that with our partners. Man, for my social media viewers out there, I would love for you to get all this information. Please check out, they had names either at creationtoday.org or Answers in Genesis or Master Books. Really, really excited about the offensive stance that this takes. This is no longer just, like Nathaniel said, poking holes in evolution and saying evolution can't happen because this is a prediction, and then the data supporting the prediction of a biblical account. You can read the account right there in Genesis chapter 10. I pulled it up. Hopefully we'll get to a little bit of this. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and it gives you the generations and how many people. And being able to trace back to that now genetically is truly, truly remarkable. Truly remarkable. So we'll get into the science of that with our partners, Dr. Jeanson. Social media viewers and podcast listeners and my television station viewers, I have to let you guys go. Would love you to join the rest of this conversation. If you want to join this and all of our conversations, all you need to do is help us share the gospel around the world. Go to creationtoday.org/partner and partner with us. Help us get the gospel out, and you can have everything we do. We'd be delighted to have you as a partner of Creation Today. Hey, next week I got a great show for you. We're going to do our highlight reel. What has happened in the last 6 months with the Creation Today show? What questions have come in that we can answer, and what have been some of the favorite things you guys have enjoyed? We'll be covering that next week. Between now and next Wednesday, if you're not going to come over here and be a partner, do this for me. Go share the gospel with somebody who needs to hear it. Grab They Had Names. Get armed with information that supports the biblical worldview so that you can be ready to give an answer to anybody that asks you a reason of the hope that's in you with meekness and fear. Can't wait to see you guys next week. Until then, God bless.